I was pouring the last of my coffee into a travel mug when Andrew walked into the kitchen in a navy suit with his suitcase by his side. He looked composed in that way he always does before a big, weak, crisp shirt, steady hands the faint scent of cedar from his aftershave. He told me he would be flying to Dubai for meetings with potential investors. His voice was smooth, practiced. I nodded and wished him a good flight, but something under my ribs lifted like a warning. He had been different for weeks. Late nights at the office, quiet phone calls on the balcony with the door barely closed, notifications face down on the counter the moment I walked into a room. I tried to tell myself it was a stretch of heavy work at Global Capital Partners and nothing more. People in finance ride waves. Maybe this was just one of them. The lie did not land softly. It scraped. After he left, I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the muted city morning through the window. Taxis on the avenue. A siren far off. My coffee had gone cold. I took my laptop to the dining table and opened the travel app we both used. I told myself I was only looking to confirm his return date. The itinerary popped up: Emirates to Dubai, evening departure from JFK, and then a second passenger listed beneath his name, Rachel Carter. My hand slipped on the trackpad. For a heartbeat, I thought there had to be another Rachel. It is a common name. There are surely hundreds in the city. Then my mind supplied the only face that name would ever attach to. 17 and standing outside the guidance office, while a counselor told me there were questions about my essay. Rachel with a smile that said the game was already over. She had taken what I built and placed her name on it. The scholarship went to her. My parents did not say they believed the rumors, but their silence left a bruise that has never completely faded. That memory lasted the length of a breath, and then I was back at the table with the laptop bright in front of me and the name in black letters. I sat perfectly still. The apartment felt shifted by a few inches, as if the floor had moved. He was taking her to Dubai. He had arranged a long plane ride and a glossy hotel, and a week of whatever they had told themselves this was, and he had not expected me to notice a thing. Something quiet inside me closed like a vault door, and I understood that I would not be staying home. I opened a new tab and booked the same flight. I used my own card. I did not text him to ask for an explanation. There is a kind of calm that arrives when the facts finally line up. I showered, put on fresh jeans and a black sweater, tied my hair back, and stood there for a minute in front of the mirror. The woman in the glass looked like me, and also like someone I had not met yet. At JFK 2 evenings late, the terminal pulsed with movement, rolling suitcases, announcements layered over the constant hum. I checked my bag and moved through security with the dull efficiency of muscle memory. When I reached the concourse, I slowed, letting the stream of people pass me, and checked the overhead screens. Gate B6. My shoes made a small clicking sound on the floor as I walked. I saw him before he saw me. Andrew stood near the windows with his phone in his hand and a smile that belonged to a different life. He looked younger when he smiled like that, and the sight of it made something mean rise in my throat. He tipped his head toward someone standing just outside my line of sight. I shifted half a step, and there she was. She had the same carriage she always had, chin slightly lifted, eyes that went sharp when she focused on something. Her hair was dark and smooth and tucked behind one ear. A delicate diamond bracelet rested on her wrist, bright against her skin, when she adjusted the strap of her handbag. I did not need to hear her voice to know it was her. The air felt thinner. They stood close as they talked. She touched his sleeve once, and he angled his body toward her without thinking. I could read years of practice in a gesture like that. For a second, all the noise around us fell away, and there was only the two of them, and the line that connected their bodies. I told myself to breathe. I told myself that I was not going to cry in an airport. I moved to a row of empty seats across from the gate and sat the boarding pass smooth beneath my thumb. I kept my head low and watched through the corner of my eye. Andrew laughed at something she said. She laughed too shorter and edged. He checked his watch and glanced at the gate. The attendant made an announcement, and a few people stood up, the ones who liked to queue early for no apparent reason. I stayed where I was. I pressed the side button on my phone, and it vibrated to life in my palm. I typed a few words into a notes app and erased them again. No one needed to see what I was thinking. I only needed to get through the next hour. They never looked my way. Of course they did not. Why would they expect me to be here? Why would they look for the wife in the waiting area of a flight that was supposed to lift them clean out of their lives? The thought of it made a cold light flicker in my chest. I watched the way she held herself. Confident but not careless. Not the kind of woman who leaves fingerprints on a glass. I wondered what story she had told Andrew about those years when we were young. I did not try to fill in the blanks. There would be time for that. There would be time for everything once I was on that plane. My group had not been called yet. I stood and wandered toward the windows and stared out at the aircraft parked beneath the floodlights. The plane looked impossibly large and also like a secret. In a few hours, there would be only ocean and night, and the kind of silence you can only hear in the middle of the sky. My reflection in the glass wavered as passengers drifted behind me and the blue uniforms of the airline staff flashed past. An older couple sat down 2 seats away and began to play a quiet game of cards. A little boy tugged on his mother's sleeve and pointed at the nose of the plane. 2 men in suits compared calendars and spoke in shorthand about a meeting downtown next week. All of it sat around me like furniture in a familiar room while I held my breathing steady and made a map in my head of the next steps. Do not confront here. Do not speak until you are ready. Watch. Listen. Remember. The boarding announcement came again, and first-class passengers began to line up. Andrew and Rachel moved with them to the separate lane. I did not get up. I let them go. I watched the attendant scan their passes. The small electronic beep carried in the air like a pin drop, and then they disappeared down the jet bridge. I closed my eyes for a moment. My ribs felt tight. I pictured the inside of the cabin, the soft light, the way a flight attendant leans in and calls you by your last name. I pictured the 2 of them hanging jackets in the little locker and smiling at the promise of distance. My jaw ached. I massaged it and sat a little straighter. My zone was called. I rose, gathered my carry-on, and walked to the line. The carpet in the jet bridge swallowed the sound of footsteps. The air grew cooler as I moved forward. A flight attendant smiled and greeted me by name. I nodded and stepped into the cabin where the hum of air and the soft clatter of the galley made a kind of white noise. I placed my bag in the overhead bin and slid into my seat. The window showed a smear of light and the shape of the terminal. A man across the aisle was already half asleep with his arms crossed. I reached for the seatbelt and fastened it slowly. My hands were steady now. Somewhere on this plane sat my husband and the woman who had once cut a path through my future without looking back. I did not know what I would find in the hours ahead. I only knew that I could not turn back. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane settled into its rhythm, the quiet hum of engines filling the air. I leaned my head back against the seat, my eyes closed, but there was no rest waiting for me. The name Rachel Carter throbbed at the edges of my mind, a wound ripped open after years of scar tissue. It was 2001, a spring morning that smelled of chalk dust and floor wax in the corridors of Lincoln High. I was 17, clutching a manila folder with my scholarship essay inside a piece I had poured myself into for weeks. I still remembered the pride that burned in my chest when I dropped it into the collection box outside the counselor's office. For once, I thought I had a chance to prove to my parents that my words mattered. Days later, I was called back into that same office where Mr. Jennings, the guidance counselor, frowned at me with a paper in his hands. The scholarship board had flagged my essay, he explained. A nearly identical one had been submitted. My throat went dry when he said the other essay belonged to Rachel Carter. Rachel had been in my English class since freshman year. She had that easy charm that teachers adored, that other girls envied, that made boys trail after her in the cafeteria. She knew how to perform brilliance without always having to earn it. That week she smiled across the hall at me like she already knew she had won. By Friday, the announcement came. Rachel Carter awarded the State Scholars Fund full tuition to Columbia. My essay was dismissed as suspicious, my name whispered with the word plagiarism. I tried to tell my parents the truth. I told them I had proof in my drafts, the notebooks full of scribbles and crossed out lines, the late nights typing in our basement while everyone else slept. My father's eyes softened, but he didn't fight for me. My mother put a hand on my shoulder and told me not to dwell on bitterness. When Rachel walked across the stage at graduation with a gold cord around her neck, I clapped with everyone else. But inside, I was burning. The memory snapped away as the captain's voice crackled overhead, announcing our cruising altitude. I opened my eyes to the faint glow of the seatbelt sign. My pulse had steadied, but the ache was the same. It was not just about Andrew's betrayal anymore. It was about her. About the girl who had taken my future once and now had returned to put her hand on my husband's arm, like she owned that too. Hours later, after the long night over the Atlantic, we landed in Dubai. The air was heavy and hot, even inside the airport terminal. I followed the stream of passengers through customs, keeping distance from Andrew and Rachel, but never letting them slip from sight. They walked side by side, her heels clicking against the marble floor, his arm brushing hers as if it belonged there. The lounge for business-class travelers was hushed and elegant, with low leather chairs and soft lamps. I slipped inside a few minutes after they did, settling into a corner seat with a line of sight toward them. Andrew was on his phone, speaking quickly in the low register he used when business was on the line. Rachel, meanwhile, looked around the lounge until her eyes landed on me. Recognition flared instantly. Her lips curved upward, slow and deliberate, the same smile she had given me outside that guidance office 2 decades earlier. She did not look startled to see me. She looked entertained. She lifted her glass of sparkling water and tilted it ever so slightly in my direction like a toast. Then she leaned closer to Andrew and said something that made him chuckle. I gripped the armrest of my chair until my knuckles whitened. The weight of every rumor, every dismissal, every memory of my parents shaking their heads pressed down on me. She had stolen one future already. I would not let her steal another. For a moment our eyes locked across the lounge. She mouthed words without sound, but I read them clearly. You always lose. The words seared into me. A hot flush rose up my neck. I forced myself to unclench my fist to take a steady breath. She was daring me to crumble, to slink back into silence the way I had at 17. Not this time. I pulled my phone from my bag, the screen bright in the dim light. My thumb hovered over the record button. There was more than one way to fight, and I was no longer a girl too scared to defend herself. I was a woman with years of silence behind me, and everything to gain from breaking it. Andrew laughed again at something she said, oblivious. Rachel leaned back in her chair, eyes still on me, satisfied with the discomfort she believed she had created. She had no idea that all she had done was ignite something deeper. I started the recording and slipped the phone face down on the table. I did not know what I would capture yet, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This time, I was not backing down. The boarding announcement for the connecting flight to our hotel district echoed through the lounge, pulling people from their chairs. Andrew rose, checked his watch, and motioned for Rachel to follow. She stood gracefully gathering her bag, but not before glancing back at me with that same sly smile. I watched them walk toward the gate, my chest rising and falling with the rhythm of a promise forming inside me. She might think she had already written the story. She might believe she knew the ending. But this was no longer her script. I stood, slid my phone into my bag, and stepped into the current of travelers. Whatever waited ahead, I was going to meet it head-on. The jet bridge smelled faintly of metal and disinfectant, the air cooler as I stepped forward with the line of passengers. My carry-on pulled heavy behind me, the wheels rattling across the seam of the carpet. I kept my head steady, eyes forward, though every nerve was tuned to where Andrew and Rachel had gone ahead of me. Inside the cabin, the golden wash of overhead lights softened the sharp edges of exhaustion. Rows of wide leather seats lined either side, and the hum of the air conditioning wrapped around us like static. My boarding pass guided me a few rows behind them, angled just enough that their voices would carry back. I stowed my bag, slid into the seat by the window, and exhaled once, quiet and controlled. They were already settled. Rachel leaned toward Andrew, her hair falling over her shoulder, as she whispered, though not softly enough. His hand rested on the armrest between them. his posture casual, confident, like this was the most natural thing in the world. I bent over my bag again, pulled out my phone, and set it on the tray table. My thumb brushed the recording app, a red circle lighting up, and I turned the screen face down. The timer began silently ticking. I leaned back, folded my hands in my lap, and let the steady rise and fall of their words drift into my ears. Andrew's voice was low, deliberate. He spoke of transfers, reimbursements, and numbers that sounded like they belonged in boardrooms, not whispered in the soft dark of an airplane cabin. Corporate card, he said the phrase sharp enough to pierce through everything else. My stomach tightened. He was speaking of global capital partners of funds not meant for her, of misused trust. Rachel's reply was light, almost teasing. She asked if anyone would notice, if compliance would raise a flag. Andrew chuckled, dismissive, explaining how easily expenses could be disguised, how a bonus line could cover nearly anything with the right paperwork. Each word dropped heavy into the recorder on my tray table. Each word was a fracture in the image of the man I had married. A flight attendant appeared, offering wine. Rachel accepted with a smile, Andrew followed, and their glasses clinked softly. I took the water placed before me, the cool condensation sliding against my fingers. I sipped, willing my face into a mask of indifference. They carried on, their voices lowering and lifting in rhythm. They spoke of Dubai, not as a business trip, but as a promise of more, of something waiting beyond this flight. Rachel laughed, that same bright sound she had perfected in high school, the one that once covered lies in front of teachers and friends. My throat burned. Andrew leaned closer to her, murmured something I could not catch, and Rachel rested her hand gently on his sleeve. Then, as if drawn by instinct, her head turned. Her gaze traveled past him, past the wineglass in her hand, until it met mine. The look was deliberate, steady. Her lips curved upward, slow and merciless, and she shifted slightly in her seat, so the gesture was unmistakable. She laid her hand fully on Andrew's arm, now her body angled toward him, but her eyes never left me. Her voice was soft, but carried clearly in the quiet cabin. Some chances never come twice. Andrew chuckled, distracted by her touch, oblivious to the undercurrent in her words. Rachel's eyes narrowed, her smile sharpening. She leaned in just enough, her gaze locked on me like a challenge. You will never take this one back. Heat surged through me, my nails pressing into the armrest. For a moment I felt 17 again, standing in that counselor's office, while my scholarship slipped into her hands. The same smug certainty lived in her expression now. But I was not that girl anymore. I let my breath even out. I let my hand rest steady over the phone on the tray, the recorder capturing every syllable. My face gave nothing away. She leaned back, satisfied, sipping her wine. Andrew reached for the in-flight magazine, his attention drifting. I watched the timer blink on my phone screen, and then folded my hands again. Outside the window, the runway lights blurred into streaks as the plane gathered speed, lifting us into the night sky. The engines roared, and the cabin tilted, pressing me into the seat. Their voices dropped again to murmurs indistinct under the drone of ascent. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the vibration beneath my feet, the rumble of metal and air. Her words echoed still, but they no longer hollowed me. They steeled me. When the cabin leveled and the seatbelt sign chimed off, the flight attendants began moving again, trays clattering softly. I glanced at Andrew and Rachel leaning comfortably together, oblivious to what they had just given me. I straightened in my seat, adjusted the scarf around my shoulders, and reached for the water again. The glass was cool, steady in my grip. I had the recording. I had her words. I had the truth. The engines hummed low and constant, carrying us forward, carrying me toward a storm I was no longer afraid to face. The heat wrapped around me the moment I stepped off the plane, thick and dry, carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and dust. Dubai stretched out beyond the glass walls of the terminal, all steel and light, a city built to impress and intimidate at the same time. I moved through customs quietly, my passport stamped with a hollow thud, and kept Andrew and Rachel within sight as they walked ahead, laughing as if the world belonged to them. By the time I reached the hotel district, the sun had already dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and violet. Their choice of hotel gleamed like a monument to indulgence fountains, spraying arcs of water in front polished marble underfoot. I didn't check in there. Instead, I chose a smaller hotel across the boulevard, a place with fewer chandeliers and fewer eyes. My room overlooked the entrance to theirs, and that was all I needed. From the edge of my bed, I opened my phone and stared at the empty account I had created on the flight. Anonymous, faceless, with only one purpose. I uploaded the first story, a blurred photo of the chandelier in the lobby, its prisms scattering light across the marble floor. The caption was simple: "Some things shine on the surface while rotting underneath." And then the hashtag, "From high school to home wrecking." Within an hour, the post had picked up whispers. Strangers speculated, old acquaintances from back home clicked and shared. It was working. That night, I positioned myself at the back of the hotel restaurant where Andrew and Rachel were scheduled to dine with two men in tailored suits. From my corner table, I had a clear view. Andrew leaned forward, his tone animated, as he discussed numbers and projections. Rachel smiled sweetly, her hand grazing his sleeve as though she belonged at that table. She didn't, but she had always been skilled at making people believe lies. I lifted my glass, snapped a photo of the wine against the background blur of their table, and wrote, "Dinner tastes different when you know who is really eating." The hashtag trailed behind again, sharper this time. The comments grew. People wondered who the posts were about, others tagged friends, and speculations swirled. I left before dessert, slipping into the heavy night air, my pulse steady. Evidence was gathering one shard at a time. The next morning, I walked into the hotel lobby again, dressed casually, sunglasses hiding my eyes. I had no intention of approaching them. I only wanted to see. Rachel appeared first, her emerald dress from the night before, replaced with a cream linen suit. Andrew followed, his hand brushing the small of her back, a performance they seemed to have rehearsed down to the smallest detail. Then out of nowhere, a familiar voice called my name. "Maddie." I froze, then turned. There he was, Sheldon Price, my neighbor from Manhattan. 70 years old, wiry but spry khakis, pressed, his ever-present camera hanging around his neck. He smiled wide, his tan face creasing with recognition. "Well, I'll be damned. Never thought I'd see you in Dubai of all places." "Vacation?" I forced a smile, my mind racing. "Something like that," I said. "And you architecture," he replied cheerfully, patting his camera. "Gotta keep the eyes sharp." We exchanged a few pleasantries, safe words wrapped around the thrum in my chest. Then his expression shifted, a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. "I think I caught some folks you might know last night," he said. Without waiting for my answer, he pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. The video sprang to life. Andrew and Rachel were in the hotel lobby, his arm slipping around her waist, her lips close to his ear as she whispered something that made him laugh. The timestamp glowed indisputable. My throat tightened, but my face stayed calm. "That's familiar," I said. "Figured I'd send it your way," Sheldon replied, his voice casual. "Memories are worth keeping." He pressed a button, and my phone buzzed in my hand a second later with his message. The file was there, real and undeniable. I thanked him, and he waved off my gratitude with the ease of someone who had no idea what he had just handed me. Then he wandered off toward the elevators, humming under his breath. I sank into a leather chair, opened the video again, and watched. Every gesture, every smile, every careless touch was preserved, now no longer hearsay, no longer shadows. The proof was strong enough to break through silence, strong enough to stand on its own in the daylight. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe deeply. I had the recording from the plane. I had the posts that were already stirring online. And now I had this, an outsider's witness with no stake in the story. The evidence was complete. The walls Andrew and Rachel thought were unshakable had already started to crack. I closed the file, slid my phone back into my bag, and lifted my head. The storm had arrived, and I was no longer just its target. I was holding the lightning in my hand. The morning after Sheldon handed me the video, the news began to ripple outward. I woke to headlines flashing across financial blogs and niche market forums, whispers about irregularities inside global capital partners. The articles did not name Andrew yet, but they spoke of undisclosed relationships, conflicts of interest, and money that might not have traveled where it should have. My phone buzzed relentlessly, with alerts, each one another crack, splitting open the facade of the life he thought he controlled. On social media, the hashtag I had created began to breathe on its own. From high school to home wrecking showed up in feeds I had not touched, reshared with speculation and sharp commentary. The posts were vague enough to avoid direct exposure, but the context had already seeded itself. Anonymous accounts picked up the story, connecting dots, building a narrative that Andrew and Rachel had no idea was tightening around them. That afternoon, I sat in a quiet cafe near my hotel, watching the comments scroll, sipping bitter coffee as the world slowly turned against them. I had never felt so calm and so alive in the same breath. Back in New York, the board of Global Capital Partners convened an emergency session. The minutes leaked within hours. Compliance officers raised red flags about corporate card usage, unexplained reimbursements, and emails that did not line up. Andrew's name appeared in an internal memo, and I read it twice just to let the words sink in. He was under investigation. Rachel was not untouched either. A former classmate from NYU forwarded me an email from the university's ethics committee. She was summoned for a hearing, asked to explain financial ties and undisclosed arrangements. Her bright future in graduate studies now hung under the same shadow she once cast over me. The phone calls from family came next. Evelyn and Martin Andrews' parents called me one evening while I sat on the balcony of my hotel, the city lights shimmering below. Evelyn's voice was sharp, laced with indignation. "How dare you spread lies about our son? He is a respected man, a husband who has given you everything." I held the phone to my ear, letting her anger wash over me. I did not raise my voice. I only said quietly, "Everything I have is the truth. You will see soon enough." She hung up before I finished. My own parents were softer, but no less doubting. Patricia asked me if I was sure, her tone weary, as if she feared I was reliving high school grudges that had never healed. Walter murmured in the background, telling her to give me space, but I could hear the skepticism in his silence. It was the same silence they had offered me 20 years ago, when Rachel had taken my scholarship. That night I did not sleep. I lay awake listening to the hum of the air conditioning, the muted traffic outside, and the relentless pulse of my own thoughts. Doubt pressed hard against the walls of my resolve, but each time I watched the videos, each time I replayed Andrew's voice on the recording, I reminded myself that doubt belonged to them, not me. The next morning, I made an appointment with Dean Coleman, a divorce attorney known for his bluntness and precision. His office was on Park Avenue, a paneled room with shelves of law books that smelled faintly of leather and old paper. He greeted me with a firm handshake, his eyes sharp behind rectangular glasses. I laid everything before him. The recordings, the photos, the anonymous posts, the video Sheldon had captured. He listened without interruption, occasionally jotting notes with a fountain pen. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. "Spousal financial misconduct," he said finally. "That's what this is. If your husband used joint accounts or corporate funds to support his affair, you have leverage. You can file for divorce on grounds of misconduct, and the court will favor you when dividing assets." My throat tightened. "Does that mean I can keep the Maserati?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. Dean gave a small smile. "If it is titled in your name, and we can prove he funneled money elsewhere, yes. Not only that, but you will have a strong claim to a larger share of marital assets." He leaned forward, his voice deliberate. "You are not powerless, Maddie. You have evidence. That is more than most people in your position ever get." I sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words pressing into me, not as a burden, but as a strange, liberating strength. He closed the folder with a decisive snap. "Do not reveal your hand yet. Let the investigation at Global Capital play out. Let the ethics committee question Rachel. The more pressure builds, the stronger your position becomes." I nodded, my hands folded tightly in my lap. When I left his office, the late afternoon sun washed the street in a golden haze. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, watching taxis blur past the horns of the city, rising and falling like an endless tide. The storm had not broken fully yet, but I could feel the air thickening, charged with the promise of what was to come. I clutched my bag closer to my side, the weight of my phone inside it, a reminder of the files I carried. Proof layered upon proof, each one another spark. The world was beginning to turn its eyes on Andrew and Rachel, and I was waiting patient and steady as the fuse burned slowly toward the fire. The invitation landed in my inbox as if it had been meant for me all along. Global Capital Partners was hosting a reception at their Midtown headquarters, a celebration of a new fund launch, a chance for executives to mingle with clients and the press. Andrew's name was listed among the speakers. Rachel was not mentioned, but I knew she would be there. She never missed an opportunity to drape herself across a spotlight. I arrived in a black dress that fit like armor, my hair pulled back, my phone heavy in my clutch. The lobby buzzed with conversation glasses, clinking photographers, flashing bulbs, as suited men and women leaned into each other's confidence. I moved quietly unnoticed until the doors opened to the main hall. At the front of the room, Andrew stood at the podium, his voice carrying over the crowd, practiced and smooth, the tone of a man who still believed he could hold the world in his palm. Rachel sat near the stage, emerald silk, catching the light. Her eyes swept the room with satisfaction, landing on me for only a moment before sliding away as if I were invisible. My chest burned, but I waited. When the speech ended, the applause swelled. Andrew smiled, stepping down, shaking hands. That was when I moved. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I walked to the center of the room, the crowd parting slightly, curious. I did not raise my voice at first. I simply said, "Andrew Turner." The room stilled. He turned, his face shifting from charm to confusion. Behind him, Rachel froze, her smile faltering. I lifted my phone, tapped the screen, and his voice filled the hall. The recording played clearly, his words about the corporate card, about moving funds, about how no one would notice. Gasps rippled across the crowd. Andrew's jaw clenched, his hand twitching at his side. Then Sheldon's video appeared on the screen behind me. I had arranged it with a contact at the press. The footage was grainy, but damning. Andrew and Rachel in the hotel lobby, his hand at her waist, her lips near his ear. The timestamp glowed. A murmur rose like a wave, colleagues whispering, clients turning away. Andrew stepped forward, his face pale. "Maddie, what are you doing?" he muttered, his voice too low for anyone but me to hear. I met his eyes steady. "Telling the truth." Rachel pushed up from her chair, her voice sharp. "This is taken out of context. It's nothing." But the room no longer believed her. Reporters raised their phones, recording every second. Someone whispered her name, and another voice added, "She's the one from Lincoln High, the scholarship scandal." The words spread quickly, a thread unraveling. Once a betrayer, always a betrayer. The phrase took hold, repeated in corners, swelling until it was no longer a whisper, but a chant. Rachel's face blanched. The board members of Global Capital moved to the front, their expressions grave. One of them, silver-haired and severe, spoke firmly. "Mr. Turner, until the investigation is concluded, we cannot allow you to continue representing this firm. Please step down." Andrew opened his mouth, then closed it. His shoulders sagged. For the first time in years, I saw him stripped of authority, the polish gone, the man underneath exposed. Rachel tried to reach for his arm, but he pulled away, shame painted across his face. The crowd's eyes seared them both. Cameras flashed, capturing the fall of two people who had thought themselves untouchable. I stood rooted, my hands steady at my sides, the noise of the room swelling around me. It was not triumph I felt, not yet. It was clarity, sharp, and cutting, the certainty that the facade was gone. Andrew and Rachel had been undone, and the world had watched it happen. The fallout came faster than I ever imagined. Within 24 hours, Global Capital Partners announced that Andrew had been suspended indefinitely. His name was stripped from the firm's website, his photo removed from the leadership page, his access to accounts revoked. News anchors spoke of financial improprieties, compliance violations, and the erosion of investor trust. I watched the clips from my living room in Manhattan, the skyline outside tinted gold by the setting sun, and felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. Rachel was no safer. The ethics committee at NYU acted swiftly, pulling her from classes and freezing her fellowship. Former classmates dug up stories of her cutting corners of whispered rumors that had once seemed petty, but now felt prophetic. Screenshots of my old hashtag spread until her name trended beside it. Comments flooded her accounts, labeling her with words she had once whispered about me. Once a betrayer, always a betrayer. Evelyn and Martin, so quick to defend Andrew days earlier, fell into silence. They did not call me again. They issued no statements. Their absence spoke louder than words, a retreat into shadows they could not control. Then my own parents called. My mother's voice cracked before she finished the first sentence. "We should have listened, Maddie. We should have believed you back then." I stood by the kitchen counter, my hand gripping the edge until my knuckles whitened, listening as she admitted the thing I had carried alone for 20 years. My father spoke next, steady but low, telling me he had seen the reports, that he was ashamed of the doubt he had let fester. I closed my eyes and let the tears come, not of pain, but of release. Their words could not return what I lost, but they stitched something inside me that had been torn since I was 17. In the middle of the storm, an unexpected call arrived. A recruiter from Silverman Strategies, a rival firm to Global Capital, had been following my posts and the clarity with which I dismantled the lies. They wanted me to lead their communications division. The offer was bold, generous, and carried the promise of a clean start. I accepted without hesitation. The first day in my new office, I sat at a desk overlooking Bryant Park, the trees below shedding their last leaves of autumn. Papers stacked neatly beside me, emails pinging with introductions and congratulations, the murmur of a team already looking to me for direction. I realized I had stepped into the role Rachel had always pretended to play, only this time it was mine by right. One evening, weeks later, I took the Maserati out of storage. The leather smelled rich and familiar. The engine roared as I steered onto the Henry Hudson Parkway. The river stretched alongside me, black water catching the glint of city lights. Wind tangled my hair, and for the first time in years, I felt unbound. I thought of Andrew stripped of title, his accounts frozen, his name tainted in circles where reputation is currency. I thought of Rachel, shut out of the university, her followers dwindling, the chant echoing in her silence. I thought of my parents, their late but heartfelt confession, the way their voices had trembled with regret. As I pressed the accelerator and felt the car surge forward, the Hudson glimmering to my right, I held those truths together. Betrayal, exposure, regret, and freedom. The Maserati ate the miles, the city unfolding ahead of me like a promise. I did not smile. I did not laugh. I only breathed deeply, filling my lungs with air that felt sharper, cleaner, as if it belonged only to me. The road stretched open, and I drove on, steady, the wheel firm beneath my hands, the lights of Manhattan growing larger with every mile. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and polish, the kind of sterile scent that clung to places where lives were unstitched. I sat at the long oak table with my attorney, Dean Coleman, the divorce decree spread before me like the final chapter of a book I never meant to write. Andrew sat opposite, his suit still crisp, but his eyes hollow. He signed quickly, his pen scratching across the page, eager to leave without words. When my turn came, I pressed my name with steady strokes. The marriage was over. The settlement granted me, the Maserati, a portion of the apartment proceeds, and enough financial ground to build my future without him. Andrew's assets remained frozen under investigation, his fall from grace now complete. When the judge declared it finalized, a hush filled the room. I walked out into the sharp winter air, pulling my coat tighter, and felt the world expand again, wide and unwritten. Work became my anchor. At Silverman Strategies, I found my rhythm, quickly shaping messages, steering narratives, commanding a team that believed in my vision. My office overlooked Bryant Park, the trees bare against a sky the color of steel. Each day, I felt stronger, more myself, a woman no longer defined by betrayal, but by what she had built after it. Yet something lingered. I had more than evidence now. I had a voice, and it felt wrong to keep it quiet. The idea came late one night as I scrolled through messages from women I had never met, women who had found my anonymous posts and written to thank me for speaking what they could not. Their words filled my inbox like a chorus. That was when Justice Speaks was born. I recorded the first episode at my kitchen table, a microphone balanced on a stack of books. My voice trembled at the start but steadied as I spoke, recounting not just what Andrew and Rachel had done, but the years of silence that came before. I told the truth not with bitterness, but with clarity, the kind of honesty that cut through the noise. Within a week, thousands listened. By the end of the month, tens of thousands. Women wrote from across the country, sharing their stories of infidelity, manipulation, and the long climb back to dignity. They wrote about fathers who doubted them, husbands who belittled them, colleagues who took credit for their work. Each story was a mirror, and together they built something larger than any of us alone. Sheldon became an unexpected star. I invited him onto the podcast after he sent me a message joking that he wanted to clear his name as the world's most accidental paparazzo. His dry humor and sharp observations won listeners instantly. He recounted the day in Dubai, when he happened to lift his camera, how he had never imagined capturing the fall of a Wall Street executive. He teased me gently, called me the calmest storm he had ever seen, and our laughter threaded through the episode like light. Listeners begged for him to return, and he did, becoming a regular voice, a reminder that even in betrayal, unexpected allies emerge. One evening months later, I sat by the Hudson River in the Maserati, the engine quiet, the water shifting under the moon. My parents' voices echoed in memory, their apologies still fresh, their regret sincere. We had spoken many times since, and though the years of disbelief could never be erased, their willingness to see me now fully, and without doubt, had given me back a piece of myself. I realized then that forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant reclaiming the parts of me I had once surrendered to their silence. The past remained etched into me like a scar, but scars do not weaken. They remind. The girl who lost her scholarship because no one believed her had become the woman who stood in a room full of her husband's colleagues and told the truth. The woman who once felt powerless had become a voice for thousands. I gripped the wheel, feeling the leather smooth beneath my hands, and started the engine. The city lights flickered in the distance, alive and waiting. I knew the road ahead would never be free of shadows, but I also knew they no longer frightened me. If betrayal had been the fire, then survival was the steel it forged. And now at last, I was ready to speak not only for myself, but for every woman still waiting to be heard. Justice was no longer a dream whispered in silence. It was alive, carrying my voice out into the world.